The coming of the railroad to Hornellsville 130 years ago was the one big factor responsible for the growth of the entire area, including all towns and villages, some of them not on the Erie Railway line.
Traffic that had flowed along the turnpike from Ithaca to Olean, which began in 1809, slowed, and river traffic, except for lumber rafting, had almost disappeared. Residents of the southern tier began talking about railroads in 1831, and benefits of such a faculty were stressed.
In April of 1832, an act was approved in Albany, characterizing a firm to construct the New York and Erie Railroad.
4 years later, the New York and Erie began to grade a section of roadway at Almond and Accordance when it first surveyed. The grade was never used.
At the time of the first survey, it was planned that this division of the railroad would terminate at Almond and the necessary shops would be located there, in Almond.
Land was even purchased. Work was suspended for several years, and the company reorganized, and it was decided to make the line terminal at Hornellsville.
The population of Hornell and Almond were about equal at that time, but Hornellsville began to grow rapidly after their terminal was established. One by one, industries which had located in Almond moved to what now is Hornell.
They built the railroad, and when the railroad was completed in 1851, it came just above New York City and went all the way across the bottom of New York. At that time, it was the second longest railroad in the world. The only one that was longer was the railroad between Leningrad, well, now it's St. Petersburg, and Moscow, and I actually have ridden on that. But this was the second longest one. And the people in Dunkirk were all excited because you got Lake Erie here, of course. And they thought that they were going to get all this business. But Dunkirk tried to stop it, but a branch was built from Hornell up to Buffalo. And when that happened, and they also built another branch down here that went into Pennsylvania and all the way over to Chicago. So Hornell was at the break point right here. Buffalo, Chicago. Hornell's right. And because of that, trains would come up here carrying cars, some to go to Buffalo, some to go to Chicago or Meadville or the places down here. So Hornell had a huge yard, and they would put the trains together and take them apart. And they had little switch engines to do that.
1830s, land was being surveyed and considered.
The Erie Railroad really is what got Hornell started. The tracks reached Hornell in 1851. I don't remember quite that far back, but they did. And my great-grandfather came over from Ireland, and he got a job with the Erie Railroad. His son, my grandfather, worked on the railroad, and my grandmother did too. Both of them used that telegraph key there. That's how they sent messages back and forth. Instead of using voice, they did it by code. Like a letter A was a dot and a dash, B was a dash and 3 dots, E was a single dot, T was a single dash, and that's how they talked back and forth. 3 of my great uncles worked on the railroad, my uncle worked on the railroad, my father worked on the railroad, and I worked on the railroad.
Remember way back I said something about the Erie, New York Lake Erie Western was the widest railroad? That's because it used a 6-foot gauge. Between the rails was 6 feet. Standard gauge is 4 feet 8, and believe it or not, 1/2 inch. Oh my! Somebody said that the width of a horse is behind when it used to fit between the rails of a buggy. Somebody said that the width of a horse was probably a Roman chariot. I don't know. But anyway, the Erie was 4 or 6 feet wide, and that caused problems because when they get to some place where they had to exchange cars with another railroad, they couldn't do it. So they had to change cargo from one car, wide gauge, to one car, standard gauge, 4 feet, 18 inches. This didn't work out too good, so the railroad finally decided one day we're going to change the gauge from wide to standard. They placed tools and men every so often, and when the signal was given, within 10 hours, the whole railroad was standard gauge, just like that, bam.
1841, construction of the railroad lines began in this area.
1843. The population was 300 people. Only roadway. Main, Seneca, and Canisteel streets had been developed with houses and stores.
By virtue of its geographical position, and Hornell was destined to become the most important point on the Erie system between New York and Chicago. It was practically 1/3 of the way from New York to its western terminus. It was to become the end of 3 divisions of the road, the Susquehanna, Allegheny, and Buffalo divisions. It was necessary to have great yards located here to facilitate the flow of the freight and passengers. It was also necessary to establish here immense shops for repair and maintenance of the rolling stock.
1850, population 300 to 700, 100 houses, 2 churches, 2 schools, a hotel, and 1 store.
1850, the first Erie locomotive came into Hornellsville, and Orange number 4 having won a 20-mile race against a stagecoach.
May 14th, 1851, the Erie Railroad comes to Hornellsville, the first passenger train to travel the entire length of the Erie from Piermonton, Hudson to Dunkirk arrived in Hornellsville, with the President of the U.S. Millard Fillmore and the Secretary of State, Daniel Webster, on board. Webster was on a rocking chair on a flatbed.
November 26, 1851, Hornellsville Weekly Tribune, his first published by Edwin Ho. It started because there had not been any representation from Hornell at the railroad May 14th, and the big city newspaper left out Hornell.
1865, population of Hornellsville was 5,338.
So what I have here is I have Polish bonds, and I'll show them to you. So this one is a Republic of Poland $100 bond. And what happened was in Hornell, a lot of immigrants worked for the railroad. And my great-grandfather, Frank Cardamone, actually had one of them living with him. And what they would do is when they would make their money from the railroad, they would in turn invest in these bonds because $100 of this went back to Poland. So they thought that while they were in the U.S., they would help out their homeland and buy these bonds. So they bought these bonds, and then on the inside there are little tags, and each tag has a date and a month attached to it. And each month they could take this back to the bank and get that exact dollar amount. So this was a $100 bond that they bought for $100. And then on this one is the 53rd installment of this. So on October of 1946, they could get $2.50. And then on October of 1947, they can get another $2.50. That does not seem like a lot of money, but that probably could have helped them through the month buy groceries, maybe even pay for rent. So $2.50 went a long way back then.
How would that help with groceries?
$100 back then was probably like, $1,000 or $10,000 now. So they paid $100 for this, and after the 75th installment, it all added up to a little over $168. So it's about 6% return on their $100 investment. And the guy that my grandfather had staying with him, he actually was hit by a train and killed. And these were passed down. My grandpa didn't cash them in. My great-grandpa didn't cash them in, and then handed them down to his son. And then my grandfather tried to contact the National City Bank of New York, which is now Citibank, and I know we've all heard of Citibank. So that's turned into Citibank. They actually have.
Courier and Ives. The scene is of the old Hornell station where passengers got off the train to eat. The profusion of commercial lettering on the cars and locomotive is uncommon for Courier and Ives, who usually kept the sales messages subdued.
The unusual thing about it was my grandmother took over the Cameron Mills station. There's a little picture of it there. That's the Cameron Mills station. My grandmother, and we only knew of one other woman in the country, a lady in New Mexico, who operated a station. The railroad was a man's world. During the war, some women got jobs. They had a woman here in Hornell that would grease the wheels and so on. But my grandmother, as a station agent, was really unusual.
1877, the Erie Railroad employed 800 people. Erie shop employees worked 12 hours a day for wages as low as 10 cents an hour.
Did you ever hear of the Ice House?
Yes. You have
I
it down
think
in
so,
our notes.
yeah.
We take notes.
Okay. When the Ice House used to service refrigerator cars. Our refrigerator cars were insulated box cars, which had ice bunkers in them, and the men down at the Ice House would pour ice into the top of those cars to keep products, produce, meat, whatever, from spoiling. When the Ice House burned down, it was just about the same time as mechanical refrigerators come in, a little diesel motor made electric, or made the air conditioning, which kept everything cool. But at one time, the Erie Railroad had a reputation for getting the produce, like cherries, from Chicago to New York in the shortest time. They had a good reputation.
1880, population 8,195.
That's where the museum is now, okay? But that was the ticket office, the baggage room, the express room. Upstairs was where the train dispatchers were, the superintendent's office. Downstairs were yard master, car inspectors, office workers like train masters, load form of engines. It was just busy, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all the time it was busy.
1880, a new brick Erie Railroad depot was built in Hornellsville after the original depot burned. 1849, the first Erie shop or shed was built in 1849. It was enlarged in 1850 to accommodate the 3 engines and machinery for repairing the same. It was burned in 1856. The ground was broken for new shops and engine house, and the foundation laid in 1854. The old shops being too small, the building was completed in 1856 and was dedicated by Grand Ball September 4th, 1856. The Erie shops at Hornellsville cover 6 acres of ground, including 2 roundhouses. The latter will accommodate 42 engines. The car shops employ 50 men. The machine shops and roundhouses employ 172 men. Besides, there are 120 engineers and firemen on the Western Division of the Erie Road and 300 engineers and firemen on the Buffalo Division. The answer is that ice cream in one of the most delicious forms originated not far from Rochester, for pie a la mode was launched in 1842 in Hornell. One of the many stories this corner had heard and read about the favorite way to eat pie stems from an old Erie restaurant once located in Erie Railroad Depot in Hornellsville years before the city dropped the bill in 1906. The local angle, most reputed to be true, is the one where the traveler hurriedly alighted from a waiting passenger train and ordered a dish of ice cream and pie. The waitress, according to the story, accidentally dropped the ice cream atop the pie, and the diner told her he'd eat it that way because he was in a hurry to get back aboard the train. That's one story. Here's another passed along. Claims a former Erie Railroad magazine story noted that Pie La Mode got its start in a Loder Street restaurant in what was then Hornellsville. The story has it that the restaurant ran out of heavy cream with which to make whipped cream, and that the manager of the put ice cream on the pie.
1891, Hornellsville had grown to contain 3 large hotels, 4 banks, 5 silk mills, a planing mill and sash factory, flour mill, a tannery, 2 fence and cable factories, a fairground with horse racing park, a shoe factory, and an opera house.
1900 population of city of Hornellsville was 14,000.
1948, the Erie Railroad switched from steam to diesel locomotives. The diesel engines required much less maintenance, meaning that hundreds of men working in the Hornell repair shop were eventually laid off. These layoffs worked to the beginning of the railroad's demise in Hornell.
So when I was your age, a little younger, they were making a switch over. The freight trains were being pulled by the steam engines still, but the passenger trains, which had a lot less smoke and stuff, were driven by gasoline, diesel fuel. They were carrying the passenger trains.
1950, population of Hornell, 15,000.
December 31st, 1969, Erie-Lackawanna Railroad passenger service was discontinued. The expansion of this was train number 5 and 6, which ran until January 4th, 1970 for the holiday travel.
All right, so the depot was in full swing. We had passenger trains up until 1969, and the service was stopped. And then there was more people laid off because, well, you need baggage handlers, ticket sellers, trainmen, and all those folks that took care of it. There was one Russian lady that used to pedal ice through the cars, to replace the ice in the cars. And of course the shops, well, when the steam locomotives left in 1952 or 54, the shops were downgraded because they only had to take care of diesels. The diesels were easy to take care of. All it needed was fuel and light maintenance unless they broke something. But steam locomotives are very, very work intensive. So a lot of guys got laid off there and they had to go find work elsewhere. By now the population had lost about 1,000 people. It was down to 1950. In 1960, the Erie Railroad merged with the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad. Remember I mentioned them before?
Yeah.
And those folks got together and they took up some of the railroad here and they took up some of the railroad there. And a lot of men got laid off, lost their jobs, or had to move, so the population went out, dropped a little more. In 76, Erie-Lackawanna merged with 5 other railroads in the Northeast, which were having financial trouble, and it became Conrail. That was when you had the big blue locomotives running back and forth. Remember Conrail? Some of you are too young. That cost a few more jobs because things moved out of here, like the accounting bureau went to Scranton and the shops went to Marion, things like that. So Hornell was having a hard time. The eastbound fast freight yard, which was, well, between Cass Street and, East Avenue and McGee Road and Castile. That was the fast freight yard, and over on the other side was the Woodruff yard. That was the westbound yard. Now you had a yard master over here, and you had a yard master over there. You had callers over here. You had clerks over there. You had clerks over there. You had people making.
1990, population of Hornell, 9,500.